It kind of seems like what Alabama has done is they were so racist on the front end that they're now they've prevented themselves from being racist on the back end of this, is kind of what it seems like to me.
Yes, they shot themselves in the foot. And I just want to be clear that here's the problem is that what the Supreme Court of the United States has done is laid out a roadmap for the people with bad intentions in their hearts, which basically says, look, just don't say that you are discriminating on the basis of race.
All righty, welcome back. Alabama Politics This Week, Josh Moon and David Person. Hey, listen, I've said this before. Whenever I call the SPLC office and say, or I send Ricky a text message and say, hey man, we've got this complicated issue going on in the state, and we would like to have somebody on our podcast, a professional that understands this, somebody who knows what's going on. Can you help us out with that so we can better understand the issue? He never sends just one person. He never sends one person. He always says, we've got seven. We've got 7 or 8. Who would you like? And so today we have Makhayla DesRosiers, correct? Yeah, look at there. Me with names, I'm so good at this. I wish these other guys would really step up their game a little bit. Makhayla is the state director in Alabama, and and then we also have, for the first time, Arthur Ago, right?
Perfect.
All right, director of strategic litigation. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, look, man. All right, so now we got to get serious, because we're going to talk about what's happened with the Supreme Court case, the result of the Louisiana decision, and what effect it's having here in the state of Alabama. So, Arthur, let's kind of start with you, and here's where I wanted to start with this. I have written and said a few times now, in the wake of that decision, that bad as it is, and it is bad, it is plenty bad. And it is very harmful to the Voting Rights Act. I still think a lot of people are misled over exactly what it says, because they seem to believe that this gives just carte blanche now to anybody to go out and racially gerrymander anything that they want to do, including the state of Alabama, that seems to believe it has the right to go back to maps that the Supreme Court has already deemed racially racially gerrymandered maps. So I guess if you could just kind of tell it what happened in the case, what it says, and where Alabama is right or wrong.
Okay, gotcha, Josh. And it's great to be on the show. Thanks so much. All right. High level, right?
Right,
It's bad.
yes.
The case is bad. I'm going to talk about Alabama in a second, but let's talk about what happened in the case. And in the case, what the Supreme Court and Justice Alito, in his majority opinion, essentially said was, look, we're just tweaking Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. We're tweaking the case law and the test that Section 2 uses to apply the Voting Rights Act to states, and to, in particular, congressional redistricting in the situation of the Callais case. Now, Justice Kagan, in her dissent, says, BS. You've eviscerated Section 2. And so what actually happened in the case, and I tend to, I'm leaning towards Justice Kagan's analysis of what the Supreme Court did, what Justice Alito did. What did they do? They took the Voting Rights Act, and there's 2 ways to establish a racial gerrymander under the Voting Rights Act, previous case law, pre-Callais. Number 1 is intentional discrimination. If a state says, we are going to discriminate against Black people and gerrymander these districts to either crack the power of Black people or pack them all into one district and eliminate their ability to impact the other districts or districts around them, that's illegal, and it continues to be illegal under Section 2. Now, what Alito did was he took Section 2 and said, but if there is no intentional discrimination, if there's no evidence of we are doing this on purpose to a racial minority, then there's no evidence of it. And then Section 2 is toothless. And so that's the real problem, because all of the cases and the work that we have done as civil rights lawyers across the years, and in the 50 plus years since the Voting Rights Act was passed, and in particular in the 60 plus years, and in the 40 years since it was amended to include this results test, right? Like what happens when a state acts in a certain way and the result is a disparate impact on Black people. We can proceed that way under the old law. Now under Callais, we can't, unless there's evidence of intentional discrimination. That's the problem. And so that's why my heart is broken. The hearts of my colleagues, Makhayla, our hearts are broken. Alabama's in a different situation. And so here's why Alabama might be okay, is that 3 years before Callais, Allen versus Milligan, the big Alabama case, went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States, said, fine. It's fine. The map that Alabama has drawn to create these two districts that are Black opportunity districts, that's fine. We're good with it. Supreme Court has already ruled. And what was also good about Alabama is the case came back for implementation, continues to be litigated in the district court level. And the district court last year said, we see evidence of intentional discrimination. So Alabama might be okay. That said, Secretary of State has filed motions in the district court and appealed to the 11th Circuit to say, whoa, Callais changes everything. We want to redistrict. And of course, right now in Montgomery, legislators are meeting to figure out how to redraw the map, even though our district court has said can't do that. And even though there is an order in the district court case, in that case, Allen versus Milligan, that Alabama, shall not redistrict before the 2030 election census. So Alabama might be okay. I'm less hopeful for the rest of the country. So said a lot. I'm sorry for taking up all the airspace.
No.
Said a lot.
I was just about to say, Arthur, that is probably, it is. That's the best and most concise explanation of all this that I've ever heard. It really is. That was fantastic. Because it kind of seems like what Alabama has done is they were so racist on the front end that they've prevented themselves from being racist on the back end of this is kind of what it seems like to me.
Yes, they shot themselves in the foot. And I just want to be clear that here's the problem, is that what the Supreme Court of the United States has done is laid out a roadmap for the people with bad intentions in their hearts, which basically says, look, just don't say that you are discriminating on the basis of race. You can discriminate on the basis of partisanship. You can draw these lines so that you're trying to eliminate the power of a political party.
Right. Right. And and then just be surprised that so many of them are Black people.
Exactly.
What? Who knew? Who knew that was going to be the case? Makhayla, real quick before Dave hops in, what has been the reaction around the state? I know that you're out organizing, and the SPLC is doing a lot of stuff to help organize and fight what's they're going to try to do, whether now or in 2030 or 2028 or whenever they can. What has been the reaction from most folks out that you've talked to?
People are pissed off, rightfully so. Communities are pissed off because we just went through this with Allen v. Milligan. And there was a lot of mobilizing in that second congressional district area. And there was a lot of hope 3 years ago around Allen v. Milligan. Well, now there's not a lot of hope. It's just that rage because you've already tried to slight us before, and you're doing it again. And then now, to Arthur's point, that SCOTUS having this roadmap, right, of just like taking away the civil rights. Yeah, people are pissed off. And we're trying to alchemize that energy into actually activation, but we have to feel through that rage, right? This has been a decades-long fight for voting rights. There are people foot soldiers that are still in the fight. Can you believe that? Like, there are people that cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge that are still coming down to the State House, that are still coming to the public hearings, that are still having to use their voices. We're pissed off.
Mm-hmm. Arthur, I want to ask you a question, and then Makhayla, I have one for you. So, Arthur, my question to you is: this whole intent versus impact tension that exists is something that seems to, as Josh has indicated and as you've indicated, provides a roadmap forward to discriminate racially without calling it racial discrimination. So, legally, what is the recourse? What recourse do we have from a legal standpoint to defeat this with the cover that Alito and the court has given?
Right. It's a really good question. In terms of litigation, tough right now, right? Tough to sue folks right now. Now, that doesn't mean that, when you investigate a case and you're seeing evidence of intentional discrimination, you can still bring that. And it doesn't have to be people actually saying it, but what are their actions and how are they doing it? So, for example, if you have a colleague of mine and I were speaking yesterday, and if you have a jurisdiction, we're going to take South Texas, for example, and the Latino population, right? And where the Latino population, the embrace of a particular political party in South Texas is not 100% clear with that population. And so if you are acting in a way to try to, divide up that population so that they don't have an opportunity to elect a representative of their choice, there might be some good evidence, because it's not a political, right? It's not a partisan redistricting if you're thinking about South Texas. That all said, right? So that's the evidence of like non-intentional non-explicit discrimination. What are the other circumstantial evidences around it? Now, Makhayla and her team are doing an incredible job mobilizing people. Couple of policy ways that we can go down the road. What do the state constitutions say? What does state law say? And mobilize folks to try to, and state representatives, to try to get those things passed. Florida, we just filed a case 36 hours ago. In Florida, DeSantis in Florida redistricted and said, we're redistricting on a purely partisan basis, right? He took the cue from the Supreme Court. Well, Florida's constitution prevents redistricting on a partisan basis. The state law in Florida prevents that, and he might be in big trouble, right? And so now, is there a way to mobilize folks to get those state laws passed? And at that level, then you can challenge any redistricting on the state law level. State laws that say no partisan redistricting. So that's sort of one way to do it. And another way to do it is really like it is the foot soldiers like Makhayla and our colleagues and the other organizations that are on the ground in Alabama to understand that their votes for nobody, right? Like when you step back and think about your teenage self, right? Who was your state representative? Who was your state senator? Nobody knows. Those people are incredibly important in how state policy is driven. Get out and vote for the folks and make it an issue in terms of partisanship, because you get a group of a state legislature that is anti-partisan gerrymandering, you're not going to have this problem. Right. You're not. Right. And so and they will not redistrict. And so those are some of the options that we are looking at right now to say, what's the next step forward? This is a long haul battle. And so the litigation road has really narrowed, but it might give motivation to the non-litigation folks out there like Makhayla.
Great. I'm glad to hear that there's some optimism in terms of the legal recourse that we have. Now, Makhayla, when it comes to the organizing and the activism, one thing that I noticed, and I think it was with the killing of Trayvon Martin that I noticed this, if I remember correctly. I went to a protest at Alabama A&M University up here in Huntsville, and I noticed that there were not just a lot of black people at this protest, but there were a lot of white people. And so I'm wondering, as you're working on the ground with organizing and activism, do you have a sense that this anger that you talked about earlier that people have is not just black people being angry, but do you also see white activists and other people who are not black, engaging and being angry and ready to work also?
100%. Yes. I'll say that, so SPLC believes in a multiracial democracy. So when we do our organizing and our activism, we are doing it in partnership with different races, different ethnicities, different socioeconomic backgrounds. So that's always been our angle and approach. I'll say under this current administration, we've seen more people across ethnic and racial backgrounds show up and activate now more than any other time, because they are recognizing an attack on one is an attack on all. They are knowing that they're not exempt from the harm. It's just not their time yet. And there has been such an emphasis on solidarity. And I'm extremely grateful for that, because that's one less thing we have to worry about teaching and educating people on. Because the real evil and devil here is white supremacy. It's racial superiority. It's the gerrymandering. It's the redistricting. It's the bad intent. It's the bad actors, right? So we are seeing a lot more different racial backgrounds show up and show out. And they're also leading the charge in their local communities. They're not just coming to Montgomery and, getting their T-shirts, having their signs, and then that's it. No, they're taking this material, they're taking this education, and then they're going back to their communities, and they're bringing 2 and 3 more people when we come back to the State House. So we are turning out those numbers.
Yeah. I mean, damn, Dave, Arthur and I are right here. Before we let y'all get slide out here, because I know y'all got a lot of very important work to do. Makhayla, what can people do to kind of get involved? How can they contact y'all? How can they get involved in their communities? How can they get involved statewide? How can they do things that need to be done from your perspective?
Yes, I love this question. So the Alabama State Office of SPLC has a new initiative called Days of Democracy. Each last weekend of every month, we will be out in community mobilizing people around democracy. Do you need a ride to the polls for the primaries? Do you need to check your driver's license number to make sure that the Board of Registrars knows who you are? Do you know, who you're going to be not necessarily voting for, but voting on? Have you read the amendments that are going to be on this ballot come May 19th? Every last weekend from now until the general, we will be in communities across the state of Alabama. And you can find that on our website if you look up Days of Democracy. On the policy side, I know that we have some really good policy folks in Alabama, and they have been working around the clock, session after session, to get our own Voting Rights Act. So next session, when that is a bill, we are going to send an email blast if you subscribe to our mailing list, because Alabama needs its own Voting Rights Act. And that's how you can get involved with the Alabama State Office.
Yeah. I feel like Makhayla has really shamed some of her friends for not knowing things before. Just listen to the way she talks. How do you not know who your state senator is? Get yourself out there and vote. Yeah.
We can't encourage people through shame. A few years ago, maybe. But now it's like, okay, let's break down the barriers. Why are we not voting? Why are we not engaged? What can I do? Because you get more bees with honey than vinegar. And I'm trying to get all the bees. I'm trying to get all the bees.
True.
All right. Arthur, I have one more legal question here, because reading a lot of first of all, starting with the Shelby County case, and continuing on through this case, one of the things that has been said repeatedly, which I think is, and really I think both of these cases are built on this faulty premise, and that faulty premise is the South has changed so much. Racism is no longer the same as it once was. And we don't have these same problems any longer in the South. These things are not listen, it's true enough that we don't have fire bombings and overt racism. Okay, that's true enough. But I think we all who have lived in this state, we know that the idea that racism is even close to death's door is ridiculous and nonsensical. So And again, it seems like these cases are built on this premise. They only survive because of that premise. So how can you, and have they attacked that idea? And how can you attack that idea? And is that the pathway to changing some of this?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, the problem is with the Supreme Court is, about 3 decades ago, in the affirmative action context, right, when we're talking about racism, the Supreme Court said one day we will no longer need affirmative action because we will have moved past the problems of racism in education and in other sort of circumstances. If we're talking about sort of job programs, et cetera, right? We'll move past that. And I think it was Justice O'Connor, I could be wrong about this, which justice it was, said, I anticipate that this will happen in about 25 years. Sure enough, we saw with the SFFA versus Harvard case a few years ago, they feel like they've moved past racism in higher education, right? And at least in higher education, if not at all education levels. And so it's really hard with the Supreme Court to persuade them that the Equal Protection Clause still actually exists and that they should actually put some teeth back into it. And because all of what they're saying is there evidence of intentional, they're stuck in the 1950s and 1960s when you had those white sheriffs with their German shepherds using racial epithets. And there's so much evidence. It's all sort of hidden right now. And frankly, it's also internalized, so people don't realize that they have bought into a system that promotes and continues racism in this country. So we have to be creative, right? And you're right. You're absolutely right, Josh, to say, look, let's not discount the civil rights warriors and activists that came before us. They literally were facing life or death situations, right? And so, I don't want to say that like we are in the same situation as they were in. Absolutely not. But the underlying causes of where we are and the structure that we're in right now still persists. And so we as civil rights lawyers have to be creative in what statutes and bodies of case law we use to try to pursue equity and try to pursue, as Makhayla said, a multiracial democracy where everyone has equal voice. And so we're using things like, boy, I'm going to bore you, but the Administrative Procedures Act, right? And like, did the government do something that, and violate the procedures of what they're supposed to do, right? And so use that to stop them. We're using, sort of other avenues. I know that our economic justice team is talking about preserving Black ownership of land, and they're using local law on how to preserve land, and it's that area of law is beyond me. I'm going to confess, right? But they're being very creative, and that's what's happening right now. And so I think that, and also what I'm seeing in terms of a shift is a lot of people want to go into state court because they see in the Supreme Court a roadblock. And so if you go into federal court, the case could eventually trickle its way up to the Supreme Court, and people don't want that to happen. And so there's a lot of state court litigation that's happening right now, and we're looking at things in that way. And so, and in multiple different fronts, David, you brought up earlier the criminal legal system, and our criminal legal folks are now, in conjunction with our education and youth team, are now looking at ways to prevent school pushout, which is expulsions and suspensions from school, because they see that as the first step down the road to the school to prison pipeline. And they're using mental health laws to try to prevent schools from pushing people out, because we think that's a racial justice issue. And so, again, apology for taking up all the airtime, but those are some of the things that our team is trying to do, with the great assistance of Makhayla and her team in finding folks and talking to them, and how is life affecting them and impacting them. And so, and being creative.
Well, listen, no, I think that's great, and because listen, we've said before many times that the work of the SPLC is some of the greatest work that has been done in this country, and we're very appreciative of y'all and what you do and being able to partner with you in some small way on any of these things. I will say, that I'll push back just slightly on one thing that you said when you talked about what the problem with the Supreme Court is. In my estimation, it's the fact that some people couldn't get past Hillary's emails, because without that, then I don't think most of this stuff would have been any sort of a problem, because we would have a whole different makeup right now.
Fair enough.
But
Fair enough.
But listen,
True.
guys, thank both of y'all so much, Makhayla, DesRosiers, for doing all that you do, and organizing. I know it is tireless, endless work, and that you've got to bite your tongue so many times out there, because, you know, from a person who doesn't bite his tongue nearly enough, I can appreciate what you do. And Arthur, man, your team and what y'all do, it really has changed. It really has changed the country for the better. And I think that a whole lot of people are going to start to see that in the coming years, even more so. And because I think this administration, in trying to undercut the work that you all have done, it's actually going to backfire. And I think it's going to show a lot of people the great work that y'all have done, especially out of your office. And we really appreciate y'all for what you've done. So thank you so much for spending some time with us and explaining this thing. I really do appreciate it a lot.
Thanks y'all for having me.
Thank you both.
We
Thank you,
applaud
Josh.
what you do. Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Thank y'all. All right. We're going to slide out. We'll come back and wrap this thing up. It's Alabama Politics This Week. We're back in a moment.